I believe it's very likely that it's going to be, I think it's a two-horse race, and one might be so far ahead right now that it's really one person, and that's Jerod Mayo. I know Vrabel is also a strong possibility, but between those two, that seems likely where we're headed. Whether this ends up being a great hire or not, there are reports, and I think even just people openly talking about how much people love Jerod Mayo in the room, leader of men. And as I've mentioned, I was fortunate enough to get to know Jerod a little bit when I was working over at NBC, and he was doing football programming with us after his playing days were over. And just one of the smartest, funniest, most engaging guys, magnetic personality, walks in a room and everybody wants to be around him. Smile on his face for everyone, treats everybody with respect, knows your name, looks you in the eye, shares stories, holds court, and everybody just sits there and wants to listen to it. So even the teeny taste I've gotten in my time or my year or so working with him, I can say there's a lot of reasons to like, the vibe that Jerod Mayo puts out. What translates on the field in terms of strategy, who you hire, being able to run a whole football team, that's a daunting task for someone who's never done it before. So there's some risk involved there. But I like the idea of not necessarily I definitely don't want some 70-year-old retread coach who's done it, who's on his fourth job, like just for the sake of doing it. So there's that for sure as a potential thing. Among whether the choice is right or not, another thing I don't love is Bill Belichick is not being let go because of his coaching, and we're worried about who's succeeding him as coach. The real issue is who's making personnel decisions, which if they had gone differently over the last few years, if you had taken Debo over Nikhil and Pickens over Thornton and not taken Cole Strange and not, traded around the board and not drafted special teams as early and built a little bit more depth in a bench, this might have been a 9 or 10 win team this year. We're not even entertaining Bill. We're talking about where you go next. I don't know how that would necessarily go. The personnel is the issue. I do not love putting a coach in place and then looking around and be like, anyone want to work with this guy? I find it backwards. And I know that's how it works. It's really hard to get the GM in here and then have them do a round of coach interviews. The timing is weird, but this is one of the weird things when you have a guy who is both, right? Mm-hmm. Like when they're both, it's hard to replace the GM and do it first at a time when you're also looking for a head coach. But that's the situation they're in here. And they're kind of taking what I think is the easy route, which is, I already got the guy in a building. I've got what I need right here. That's good. Come on in and do it. It's a big part of your organizational philosophy as a person who's running the team, Tayler. Your coach has to jive with it. And now you're taking that choice away from them. And I think you're kneecapping your opportunity to get somebody.
Yeah, I mean, if it is Jerod Mayo, I think with Jerod and Vrabel, I think that's the smoothest course to maybe finding that general manager. Like with Vrabel, it was reported that it's not that they are handcuffed together, he and Adam Peters, but they do have both ties to the Patriots. So I'm not sure if he would still go with Mayo as well. But with Mayo, I still think that, when I asked him a few weeks ago about how does your experience outside of football kind of help you as a leader and as a potential head coach, and he mentioned how he's able to, communicate with people of all different types of backgrounds and all these things. And obviously you have experience with them. So, I agree that it is kind of funky when you have to get your coach and then you have to get the general manager. But I do feel like if there's anybody who would be able to find someone and really understand what would be a healthy relationship and someone they could really work with, I do think that Mayo is probably one of those guys just because of that outside ability. And then, like I said, with Vrabel, it seems like he and Adam Peters might end up being a package deal just because of their shared history with the Patriots, and that, Adam Peters is probably going to need a head coach. And Mike Vrabel might, I think he does want some level of say in the personnel decisions, but if he and Adam Peters are on the same page, that could potentially work. So, I know, but I still have to do my dive in the
But this is the most important draft since Bledsoe. You are in a position you never find yourself in. And you could debate Drew Bledsoe's career, but at that point, that was a home run pick to put the Patriots back on the map. You don't get that one right. If you had the guy. Again, it was Bledsoe or Rick Mirer, and they were considered to be neck and neck for the 1 and the 2. You pick wrong, You pick Myrer, there's no next, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
You don't know where you go from there. Bledsoe put New England back on the map after being absolute bottom feeders, in the, kind of early 90s sort of situation, gets them back to a Super Bowl, gets you Parcells, which gets you to which, eventually gets you to Carroll, gets you to Belichick, and then gets you to where you are here. But you have no idea the direction the franchise goes. You're talking about, at the minimum, this pick alters the course. This pick in this draft and this offseason alters the trajectory of the franchise for a minimum 3-4 years and possibly longer. So it is the most important thing the franchise has done in decades. And it's weird to think, like, I'll get to that part later. But that's the odd part to me, is you see these teams already out there, and your reports of, like, reached out to this assistant GM candidate and this personnel guy and this guy for interviews. There's teams looking for executives too. Don't you kind of have to get involved here fast and then make sure that those people are cool with Jerod?
No, absolutely. But I think there's also, there's a lot of teams that are in this position. Again, it is awkward, but this is kind of the position they're in. At least they do have their head coach, and they have somebody who, like you mentioned yourself, where the defense wasn't the problem here. And I think the best thing to do is to try to carry over as much from the defense as possible. You don't know if the Belichicks are going to leave the staff. So, I understand what you're saying, and you want to have that person with a vision for how the team is going to go from here on out. But as I mentioned on our post-game show last week, I don't think this is so bad of a roster where you legitimately have to just completely uproot everything. Like, the defense is good. The offense has pieces. You need to add like 3 or 4 starters where you say, okay, I'm comfortable with these guys really pushing us into a new era. And with the draft capital they have, and the money they have, they're in position to do it. So I agree. I'm also looking at Albert Breer. He had a list of hot names for potentially filling a general manager spot. A lot of them have Patriots ties. You have Mark Borgonzi, if I pronounced that well, the assistant general manager for the Chiefs. He was with the Chiefs back in 2009 with Scott Pioli, so he's got some Patriots ties. Trey Brown, he has ties to Jerod Mayo as well. He's currently the senior personnel executive for the Cincinnati Bengals. He's a name to watch. Obviously, as we mentioned, Adam Peters. Jim Nagy, who's the executive director for the Senior Bowl. Now, I'm not sure if he's going to want to leave. That's a bit of a stretch. But he's on the list, so he's someone who could also watch because he used to be a scout for the Patriots. So, also Elliot Wolf, the director of scouting for the Patriots. We don't know if maybe, he takes a bigger role. So, it's not a great position to be in, but it's also great that the Patriots have a pipeline. Their coaching pipeline isn't great, but their scouting pipeline is pretty fantastic. A lot of guys who've had success in the league and built great teams. As I said, the Bengals, Chiefs, and 49ers. You have guys with Patriots ties who are all looking to become general managers. So, not the best position in the world to, in your perspective, and as you said, it kind of worked backwards. But it's not like they have to go out and get completely fresh blood. And with the Crafts, we know they like to keep things in-house. They like to, have some level of continuity with people they've worked with before. Yep. I do think they're in a decent position.
The NFL season is wrapping up, and there's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets, guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL.
Let me ask you this. This is another thing I think was intended to provide stability and assurance and to keep, what was that face for?
Somebody, Mr. Jason Martin, first-year reporter, feeling on the roster. I've been covering this team for a lot longer than that, friend. I've been studying this team for a lot longer than that, so... know your role.
Taylor's the Doogie Howser of the Patriots beat, okay? And again, I'm dating myself with that reference, but he's got a PhD, my friends. So don't worry about this. This is the wrong man to go toe-to-toe with over particulars, I'll tell you that. Mm-hmm. Here's another thing I'm going to say about the Mayo situation, a potential landmine Robert Kraft created for himself. It was designed, both the O'Brien and the Mayo kind of call them promotions or, kind of installing them into prominent positions on this team, was kind of a pushback from Kraft to Bill on, dude, we can't keep doing this no OC thing. And you got to, elevate people within the organization that we want to keep here. We're going to lose these guys. The brain drain is significant, and you felt it this year. And again, Andrew Callahan and Doug Kyde and the Herald detailed some of the behind the scenes stuff with the coaching staffs about, maybe guys not necessarily doing what they need to do or the wrong positions. And obviously it all came to a head the year before with Matt Patricia and Joe Judge, totally out of their depth, trying to run an offense and coach up a second-year quarterback. And I think that, as you wrote in your piece, was probably the biggest thing that kind of got you to here, where you went from semi-competitive to the third worst team in the entire NFL. That was hard to do, and that's how they got there. So the idea was, I just don't want to lose any more of these guys. So let's bring in a qualified outside guy rather than like your second string, tight ends coach, as the OC. And let's give Jerod some assurances that he means something to us and he's here. And in fact, he basically was anointed without a position as Bill Belichick's successor, walking around the building, before, forget the corpse being cold. The guy's still alive and he's sitting there, and Bill knows he's about to, this is the guy who's taken my job. Bill doesn't really give him any extra power. He doesn't make him DC. Jerod Mayo's title remained linebackers coach, despite Robert Kraft kind of saying, this is kind of the successor, the succession plan. And I believe Kraft did it for two reasons. The stability one, but the second one was when Bill is finally done. And the assumption was always Bill's going to eventually just decide, I'm going to move on. When the record's broken and he decides he doesn't want to do this anymore, he just hands the keys over to this guy and we have continuity. But now you have continuity whether you want it or not, or worse, you have a situation where if you changed your thinking over the course of the last 12 months and you don't know if Mayo's the guy and you don't want him to lead this post-train wreck Bill experience, and say you do, you're like, oh man, I never thought Vrabel was going to be available and that's the guy I want. How do you bring him in here at this point? Is Jerod gonna be like, yeah, cool, I'll be DC under this guy? No freaking way. And no. Again, how many players might you lose with that who have determined that, like, I like this guy and I would play for this guy, and you bring in some other dude, even if they like and respect him as well, that's going to be a little weird. So you've set yourself up for a position where you almost have to give it to Mayo or have to completely wipe it out, And so I don't know. It's going to be messy. It's a messy situation. Yeah.
My only real hesitation with Mayo was the inexperience, obviously, especially when Vrabel is on the market. It's one thing if you're saying, okay, you want to retain someone who, has experience with the team, where Jerod Mayo, it's like, yes, it's him. You kind of just deal with it if he is inexperienced. With Vrabel, I, was on record as kind of taking a step back and being like, okay, especially if he's handcuffed with Adam Peters, that kind of seems like a no-brainer. He was a coach of the year 2 years ago. Obviously had success when he had a decent roster, turned Ryan Tannehill into a Pro Bowler. He has a track record. But at the same time, Mayo has been a hot head coach candidate for years. And if you think the inexperience, that's just part of it. At some point, the guy's got to get an opportunity. At some point, somebody had to give Bill Belichick an opportunity. So I understand that there's a lot of question marks, but at the same time, I do think it's great that you have somebody who can see how Belichick ran things and take all the things that were successful, which I think he'll do, and then put his own spin on it, where, you had Trent Brown. I had Dakota Randall on a couple of days ago, and he talked about how Trent was pissed off because he heard from coaches that they were devising ways to basically screw with him, because they wanted to see what his commitment was. And there was also the issue of scheduling, where the Patriots keep you on your toes, and sometimes you don't get your schedule till the day before. Same thing with media, which is maddening, where we don't know what time we're supposed to be going in until 8 o'clock the night before. And sometimes it makes sense, but then Trent Brown made the fair point of, okay, well, when it's the bye week and I want to spend time with my family, you're forcing me to buy these tickets and things, whether they're the most expensive, last minute. That's not cool. Now you have somebody in charge, whether it's Mayo or whether it's a Vrabel, where they can toe that line, where they have been in the player's shoes in a Patriots system, where they know, hey, this worked. And, after, now that I'm a coach, I understand what Bill was thinking, as opposed to, yeah, no, that was jacked up. I don't agree. I don't think that was okay. And you get that fresh perspective. So I frankly, I'm excited. I don't want them to completely gut this team and act like Bill was never here. I don't think that's how you win, because as we keep saying, Bill the coach was not the problem. Bill the GM was the problem.
It's not.
We're going to see how they handle the general manager situation. But I think it's really exciting to potentially get a guy who has both perspectives of not having with Mayo having worked and played for Bill, but with Vrabel having played for Bill and had success as a coach elsewhere.
You're not wrong at all about any of it. It's just, if you stay in-house, chances are you're going to keep, is Mayo going to fire the entire staff and bring in his own guys? Does he have the cachet to have guys? You haven't coached with other people. You haven't coached with other people before. What kind of staff can he assemble? What I don't want is 70% of it is coming back, maybe 80 with a couple of other things. That's the same team with a worse head coach. That's not great. And we're not saying, and again, it's not a knock on Mayo, but again, what happened was, again, this is this is how he did it. Everything Bill Belichick did that made him successful is also what he's done that's kind of led him to this point. And you and I have talked about this a bit, in the weeks, months leading up here. Consistently building up and training your own people and rising them up to a level of prominence where they can move on and get other NFL jobs is great. And I know Bill didn't want to hire the hot, OC or DC from somewhere, just knowing that those guys want to go out and get head coaching jobs somewhere else. And it's one of the reasons why he made you earn that title and want to stick around here. And he doesn't like constantly changing things up. So he'd rather just have a program. Bill very much views this as a college program, talking about the Patriots. And honestly, it's one of the reasons a lot of teams and a lot of new head coaches fail in their first stops is they don't have enough time to build their program. But right now, because of that, you lost your top tier and your second tier guys and are putting guys who played minimally on the other side of the ball in charge of other positions. It really is across the board, not to call out names, but it really needs I think a fairly significant overhaul on the assistants. On top of that, the Patriots operate, and especially you lose, Ross Douglas during the year as well. Patriots operated with far fewer assistants. I forget what the number is, but it's 16, 17, and the Niners, for example, have 29. They have fewer guys doing it. You have some guys doubling up. Matt Patricia was technically an O-line coach last year and the offensive coordinator, and he's like, what are you guys doing? Okay, how about you guys? Are you guys good? And you've got position players basically running their own units and their own teams and things like that. None of that is good. So you have to be able to come in and build something from scratch. And again, maybe Mayo does. Maybe Mayo is such a liked guy that he's got 100 people who are coming in. But do a lot of people with experience want to work on the staff of a less experienced guy? I don't know. It's a little tricky there.
But you also have to assume that Mayo has already thought about this for years. Again, he was I think it was 2 years ago, he interviewed with the Broncos. I'm sure he has some people where he understood if he was ever in this position, especially if he did know that he basically was going to be the head coach after Bill.
He's got to have
some people in his circle who he's exactly. And on top of that, you also have Bill O'Brien. If he doesn't get rid of Bill O'Brien,
vacancies. That's the thing. Is 7 vacancies and a bunch of people are going to be moving around here. It's going to be a massive grab and go. It's like an Easter egg hunt. You throw them all out there and say go. Everyone's going to be scrambling to get that. So that's a challenge too. But you're right, he's definitely thought about it.
Yeah, and if the Krabs are going to put him in this position, I think, one, just out of fairness, if he wasn't ready, I don't think they would make him that coach. And if he didn't come to them and say, hey, I've got some guys that I really like, and I'm sure they have to do their interviews anyway. They have to make sure that, they have to abide by the Rooney Rule, which I absolutely hate. But, they're going to have to interview candidates. And if they start looking at other people, even if they do really like Jerod and they realize, oh, God, maybe he isn't quite ready because he doesn't have a staff in place, or, what have you, I'm sure that'll be part of the decision making. And then that's where Mike Vrabel comes in. And then it's okay, well, he does have experience. He has people he's worked with. He probably has people he can bring with him. But that's so much speculation because we literally will not have any idea about any of that. Obviously, Arthur Smith is on the market for Vrabel in terms of if he wants to gut the Patriots coaching staff, they have that. But I'm sure that whoever the head coach is, they will have people in mind and people on call to bring with them.
Yeah. Does
otherwise it's just negligence on the Kraft's part, and I don't think they run that way because, if there's one thing the Krafts have done pretty well, it's find head coaches. They went from Bill Parcells to Pete Carroll to Bill Belichick. That's a pretty damn good track record.
Pete Carroll's resume looked better after the fact. His time here was a little bit stumbling and bumbling with the Patriots, and he got whacked after an 8-8 season, so it wasn't like it was a total fail. But they didn't like
it was good instinct.
They didn't like the way he was. They didn't like the direction he was taking things, and he might have. It's amazing though, his enthusiasm and his success that he's had after. Pete Carroll's going to go down as both one of the better NFL coaches, certainly of this era, and also one of the greatest college coaches of all time. He's had a remarkable career since he left here. He might have been, and this was also his second head coaching gig, but it really, it wasn't perfect then, but you're right. That line of coaches is insane when you look at it now, and the resume that they have is really incredible.